Twisted metal drifted through space like dead leaves in autumn wind. Sam Rodriguez watched the wreckage spin slowly past his ship's windows, each piece telling a story of violence and destruction. 3 months he had been searching through this graveyard of starships, looking for anything valuable enough to pay his crew and keep his salvage vessel running for another year. The Iron Star was not much to look at. Her hull bore the scars of countless salvage runs, and her engines made sounds that would worry any sane engineer. But she was home to Sam and his small crew, and she had never let them down when it mattered most. Today might be the day she finally paid for herself. Pete Williams sat at the scanner station, his weathered face lit by the green glow of the displays. He had been Sam's engineer for 15 years, following him from one salvage job to another across the outer territories. Behind him, Maria Santos checked their supplies while old Doc Henley updated their star charts. They were a small crew, but they worked well together. The debris field around them had once been the pride of the Draconic Empire. Their greatest warship, the Flame of Eternity, had met its end here during the final battle of the war. Human forces had surrounded and destroyed it along with most of the Dragon fleet. That was 10 years ago, but the wreckage still held treasures for those brave enough to search for them. "Got something big on the deep scanner," Pete called out, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the ship, about 2 clicks into the main hull section. "Readings are strange, though. Shows as organic, but it's giving off some kind of energy signature." Sam moved to look over Pete's shoulder at the scanner display. A large shape showed up clearly against the twisted metal around it. Definitely alive but not moving much. In 10 years of salvage work, Sam had seen many strange things floating in space, but most living creatures did not survive long in the vacuum between stars. "Could be some kind of alien pet," Maria suggested, looking up from her supply checklist. "Rich collectors pay good money for exotic creatures, especially ones from the dragon ships." Sam nodded thoughtfully. The war between humans and dragons had ended with humanity victorious, but it had cost both sides dearly. Dragon ships were known to carry all sorts of unusual life forms from across their empire. If they had found something rare and valuable, it could mean enough credits to retire comfortably. "Take us in closer," Sam ordered. "But keep the shields up and weapons ready. We don't know what we're dealing with." The Iron Star moved carefully through the debris, her navigation lights casting strange shadows on the floating metal. As they got closer to the large organic reading, Pete's scanner began picking up more details. Whatever was in there was definitely big, and it was definitely alive. "Picking up a heartbeat now," Pete reported. "Slow but steady. Whatever it is, it's been in some kind of hibernation or stasis. The energy readings are coming from metal wrapped around it. Looks like restraints of some kind." Sam felt his pulse quicken. Restraints meant this creature was important enough to keep prisoner, rather than simply kill. That usually meant it was either very dangerous or very valuable, sometimes both. They found a hole in the hull large enough for their ship and carefully maneuvered inside. The Iron Star's lights revealed a scene of incredible destruction. This had once been the command section of the Dragon flagship, where their greatest leaders had made the decisions that shaped an empire spanning dozens of star systems. Now it was just twisted metal and broken dreams. The creature was trapped in what had once been a holding cell, pinned under a fallen beam, but still alive after all these years. Sam had expected maybe a rare pet or exotic animal, but what they found took his breath away. It was a dragon, a real living dragon, the first one any human had seen alive since the war ended. The creature was massive, at least 15 feet long from nose to tail, with scales that seemed to shift color in their lights. Its wings were folded against its body, held there by chains and shackles made of some metal Sam did not recognize. A muzzle covered its long snout, preventing it from opening its mouth. But it was the eyes that caught Sam's attention. They were gold, and they were intelligent, following his every movement as he approached. "Sweet mother of space," Doc Henley whispered. "That's a real dragon. I thought they were all dead." The war had been brutal on both sides, but the dragons had suffered the worst of it. Their empire had fallen. Their worlds were either destroyed or occupied by human forces, and their people had scattered to the far corners of the galaxy. Most humans believed they were extinct. Seeing one alive, even chained and trapped, was like looking at a living piece of history. "How much do you think it's worth?" Maria asked, though her voice showed she already knew the answer. A living dragon would be priceless to collectors and scientists alike. They could name their price. Sam studied the magnificent creature as his crew worked to free it from the fallen beam. The dragon did not struggle or try to escape as they lifted the metal away from its body. It simply watched them with those intelligent golden eyes, as if it understood exactly what was happening and was waiting to see what they would do next. Getting the dragon aboard the Iron Star took most of the day. They had to cut through part of the ship's hull to make an opening large enough, then use their cargo manipulators to carefully move the creature into their holding bay. Through it all, the dragon remained calm and still, never fighting against its restraints or trying to break free. "Those chains," Pete said as they secured the dragon in their cargo hold. "I've never seen metal like that before. Scanner says the molecular structure is completely unknown. Whatever made these shackles, it wasn't human technology." Sam nodded, still staring at their incredible find. In all the stories told about the war, dragons were described as savage beasts that destroyed human colonies without mercy. But looking at this one, Sam saw something different. There was a sadness in those golden eyes, and an intelligence that made him uncomfortable. This was not a mindless animal. This was a thinking, feeling being that had been chained up like a wild beast. As they prepared to leave the debris field and head for the nearest trading station, Sam found himself returning to the cargo bay again and again. Each time the dragon was watching him, as if it had something to say but could not speak through the muzzle that covered its mouth. The journey to Frontier Station would take a week. Sam told himself he was just checking on their valuable cargo, but deep down he knew there was more to it than that. Something about the dragon bothered him, though he could not put his finger on what it was. Maybe it was the way it looked at him, as if it knew secrets that could change everything. 3 days out from the debris field, Sam Rodriguez could not sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw those golden dragon eyes staring at him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. He had been in the salvage business long enough to know the difference between a dumb animal and something more. And the creature in his cargo hold was definitely something more. The Iron Star hummed quietly through hyperspace, carrying them toward Frontier Station where Sam hoped to sell their discovery for enough credits to set his crew up for life. Dragon artifacts were rare enough, but a living dragon was beyond rare. It was impossible. Yet there it was, resting quietly in their cargo bay like it owned the place. Sam found himself making excuses to visit the cargo hold. He told his crew he was checking the restraint systems or monitoring the creature's vital signs, but the truth was more complicated. Something about the dragon drew him back again and again, as if it had something important to tell him. During his latest visit, Sam noticed something odd. The dragon was not trying to escape. Most animals, even intelligent ones, would struggle against chains that held them prisoner. They would test their bonds, look for weak points, try to break free. But this dragon simply lay there, watching and waiting with endless patience. "What are you thinking about?" Sam asked quietly, knowing the dragon could not answer with that muzzle covering its mouth. The response nearly gave him a heart attack. "I am thinking about truth," a deep voice said, filling the cargo bay with words that seemed to come from everywhere at once, "and about the lies your people tell themselves to sleep at night." Sam stumbled backward, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon on his belt. The dragon had not moved, but somehow it was speaking. The muzzle that covered its mouth showed no signs of being removed. Yet the voice was clearly coming from the creature. "You can talk," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your people assume many things about mine," the dragon replied, its voice carrying an accent Sam could not place. "You believe we are beasts because it makes you feel better about the war. You chain us and cage us because you fear what we might say if given the chance to speak." Sam looked around the cargo bay, half expecting his crew to come running at the sound of voices, but the ship remained quiet. Somehow the dragon was speaking directly to him, perhaps using some kind of telepathic ability that humans did not possess. "I've heard stories about dragons," Sam said carefully. "They say your kind destroyed human colonies without warning, that you killed innocent people for no reason." The dragon was quiet for a long moment, and when it spoke again, its voice carried a sadness that seemed to echo through the ages. "My name is Theron. I was not a warrior during the war, though I fought when I had to. I was a scholar, a keeper of knowledge and history. Would you like to hear the real story of what happened between our peoples?" Sam wanted to say no. He wanted to walk away and forget that dragons could speak. Forget that there might be more to the war than he had been taught. The simple version was easier to live with. Humans were the good guys, dragons were the bad guys, and humanity had won a righteous victory over an evil empire. but something in Theron's voice made him stay. "Tell me," Sam said. "The war began on a world your people called New Texas," Theron said, his golden eyes never leaving Sam's face. "A small farming colony on the edge of human space. Do you know what happened there?" "Everyone knows," Sam replied. "Dragons attacked without warning, killed thousands of colonists. It was what started the whole war." "And who told you this story?" Sam frowned. "History books. News reports. Everyone knows what happened at New Texas. All human sources," Theron observed. "Have you ever wondered why a species capable of traveling between stars would choose to attack a small farming world with no strategic value? What could we possibly gain from destroying a colony of peaceful farmers?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Sam had never really thought about it before. The attack on New Texas was just accepted history, the event that proved dragons were humanity's enemies. But when Theron put it that way, it did seem strange. "Maybe you wanted to send a message," Sam suggested. "Show humans that nowhere was safe." "A message," Theron repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, we did want to send a message, but not the one you think." The dragon shifted slightly in his restraints, and Sam noticed for the first time that the chains holding him were not just metal. They seemed to glow with their own internal light, covered in symbols and patterns that hurt to look at directly. These were not simple restraints. They were something far more complex and alien. "We came to New Texas to warn them," Theron continued. "Our deep space monitoring stations had detected something approaching from the dark space between galaxies. Something that devours worlds and leaves nothing behind but empty space. We tried to contact the human authorities, tried to explain the danger, but your military shot down our diplomatic ships before we could deliver the warning." Sam felt something cold settle in his stomach. "That's not what the history books say." "History is written by the survivors," Theron replied sadly. "When our diplomatic mission failed, we decided to land on New Texas directly and warn the colonists face to face. We thought if we could save even a few thousand lives, it would be worth the risk. But you attacked them. We landed in their fields, far from any settlements, with our weapons powered down and our shields lowered. A gesture of peace that your people interpreted as an invasion. Your news networks called it an attack before we even made contact with a single human." Sam's mind raced as he tried to process what Theron was telling him. "What happened to the colonists?" "See for yourself," Theron said, his eyes gesturing toward a data port on the wall of the cargo bay. "My ship's memory core is integrated into these restraints. Everything we recorded at New Texas is still there, waiting for someone brave enough to look at the truth." Sam stared at the data port, then back at the dragon. Part of him wanted to walk away, to forget this conversation and stick with the simple version of history he had grown up believing. But another part of him, the part that had made him a good salvage operator, needed to know what really happened. "Why are you telling me this?" Sam asked. "Because you are the first human in 60 years to visit me without a weapon in your hand," Theron replied. "Because you asked what I was thinking instead of simply assuming I was a mindless beast. Because somewhere in your heart, you already know that the official story does not make sense." Sam walked slowly to the data port, his hand hesitating over the access panel. Once he plugged into the dragon's memory core, there would be no going back. He would know the truth, whatever it was, and he would have to decide what to do with that knowledge. "The real threat that destroyed New Texas is still out there," Theron said quietly. "It moves slowly, taking its time, devouring one world after another as it crosses the galaxy." While humans and dragons were busy killing each other over misunderstandings and fear, the true enemy grew stronger. Sam's hand touched the access panel, and data began flowing into the ship's computers. What he saw in those files would change everything he thought he knew about the war, about dragons, and about the future of both their species. The truth was more terrible and more wonderful than anything the history books had ever told him. As the last of the files downloaded, Theron spoke one final time before Sam left the cargo bay. "Now you know what I know. The question is, what will you do with the truth?" Sam Rodriguez sat in his quarters staring at the data files he had copied from Theron's memory core. The images on his screen showed things that no human history book had ever mentioned. Dragons landing peacefully in empty fields, their weapons powered down and their hands raised in gestures of peace. Human military forces opening fire without warning. News reporters calling it an invasion before a single shot had been fired by the dragon ships. Sleep had become impossible. Every time Sam closed his eyes, he saw the truth about New Texas playing out in his mind like a nightmare he could not escape. The official story was that dragons had attacked a peaceful farming colony without provocation. The reality was far more complex and far more troubling. His crew noticed his mood over the next few days. Pete asked if he was feeling sick, while Maria wondered if the stress of hauling a live dragon was getting to him. Sam told them he was fine, but he knew they could see through his lies. He had never been good at hiding his feelings, and the weight of what he had learned was crushing him. 4 days into their journey to Frontier Station, Sam gave up trying to avoid the cargo bay. He needed answers, and Theron was the only one who could provide them. The dragon was exactly where they had left him, resting quietly in his restraints with that same patient expression on his scaled face. "You look troubled," Theron observed as Sam entered the cargo bay. "I've been studying your files," Sam said without greeting. "The memory core from your ship. What I saw there doesn't match anything in our history books." "Truth rarely does match the stories people tell about themselves," Theron replied. "It is easier to be the hero of your own story than to admit you might have made mistakes." Sam pulled up a chair and sat down facing the dragon. He had brought a portable datapad with him, loaded with the files from Theron's memory core. "Tell me about the real attack on New Texas. Not the human version or the dragon version, just what actually happened." Theron's golden eyes seemed to look through Sam and into the past. "Our deep space monitors detected the Devourer 3 months before it reached New Texas. We had seen its work before, in other galaxies, other times. Entire star systems consumed, their energy absorbed, their worlds left as empty husks floating in space. What is this Devourer?" Sam asked, though part of him was afraid to hear the answer. "Imagine hunger given form and intelligence," Theron said slowly. "A force that exists only to consume, to grow, to spread across the universe, eating everything in its path. My people fled from it once before, 12,000 years ago, when it devoured our original home galaxy. We came here hoping distance would protect us, but nothing stops the Devourer forever." Sam looked at his datapad, scrolling through sensor readings that showed something massive approaching the New Texas system. The readings were unlike anything he had ever seen before, showing energy signatures that defied explanation and gravitational distortions that should have been impossible. "Why didn't you just tell the humans directly what was coming?" Sam asked. "We tried," Theron said with infinite sadness in his voice. "Our first contact team sent diplomatic messages for weeks, explaining the threat and offering to help evacuate the colony. Your military commanders dismissed our warnings as lies designed to weaken human defenses. When we tried to approach New Texas directly, your ships opened fire. The datapad showed recorded communications between dragon ships and human forces. Sam could see the dragon messages clearly offering aid and warning of the approaching threat. He could also see the human responses, ordering the dragons to withdraw or be destroyed. There was no negotiation, no attempt to understand what the dragons were trying to say. "So you landed anyway," Sam said. "We had no choice. The Devourer was less than a day away from New Texas. We thought if we could land and explain the situation face to face, we might be able to save at least some of the colonists." Sam scrolled through video files showing dragon ships landing in empty farmland, far from any human settlements. The dragons who emerged from those ships carried no weapons and made clear, peaceful gestures. But human news networks were already broadcasting reports of an invasion, and military forces were mobilizing for war. "What happened when the Devourer arrived?" Sam asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. By then, humans and dragons were too busy fighting each other to notice the real threat. Theron said quietly, "The Devourer consumed New Texas while both our fleets were engaged in battle above the planet. 2 million human colonists died not because of dragon attacks, but because no one was paying attention to the real enemy." The final files in Theron's memory core showed something that made Sam's blood run cold. Long-range sensors captured the moment when the Devourer reached New Texas, an expanding sphere of absolute darkness that swallowed the entire planet in minutes. The human and dragon fleets, still fighting each other, were caught completely off guard. Some of the human ships escaped, Sam noted, reading through the casualty reports, as did some of ours, Theron confirmed. Both sides retreated to report what they had seen. But by then, the narrative was already set. Humans blamed dragons for the destruction of New Texas, and dragons blamed humans for preventing the evacuation that might have saved millions of lives. Sam set down his datapad and rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. Everything he had believed about the war was falling apart, replaced by a truth that was far more complicated and far more terrifying than anything the history books had taught him. The war lasted 10 years, Sam said. Both sides lost billions of people fighting each other instead of the real enemy. While the Devourer continued its slow progress across the galaxy, Theron added, consuming world after world, growing stronger with each planet it devoured, moving inexorably toward the core systems where most of both our populations lived. Where is it now? Sam asked, though something in Theron's expression told him he did not want to know the answer. Theron was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes fixed on something beyond the walls of the cargo bay. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It is here, in this system, moving toward the inner planets where billions of humans live in blissful ignorance of what is coming for them. Sam felt the blood drain from his face. How long do we have? Days, perhaps weeks. The Devourer moves slowly but inevitably, like a tide of darkness that cannot be stopped or turned aside. Your people are too busy celebrating their victory over the Dragon Empire to notice that their real enemy has finally arrived. The cargo bay fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the ship's engines. Sam stared at the datapad in his hands, trying to process the enormity of what Theron had told him. Humanity's greatest victory was built on a lie, and their greatest enemy was approaching while they remained completely unaware of the danger. Why are you telling me this? Sam asked. What do you expect me to do with this information? I expect you to choose, Theron replied. You can continue on to Frontier Station and sell me to collectors who will put me in a cage for the rest of my life. You can pretend this conversation never happened and live whatever time remains believing the comfortable lies your people tell themselves. Or you can help me warn them. Give your people a chance to prepare for what is coming. Unite both our species against the true enemy before it is too late. Sam looked at the dragon chained in his cargo bay, then at the data that proved everything he had believed was wrong. The choice Theron offered was no choice at all. How could he ignore the truth, even if that truth was too terrible to accept? But accepting the truth would mean giving up his life savings, betraying his crew's trust, and trying to convince a galaxy that their greatest victory was actually their greatest mistake. It would mean admitting that dragons were not monsters, that the war was based on misunderstanding, and that humanity's real enemy was still out there waiting for them. Sam closed his eyes and tried to imagine explaining all of this to Pete and Maria and Doc Henley. Tried to imagine their faces when he told them they were going to give up the biggest score of their lives to help their former enemies save a galaxy that did not want to be saved. When he opened his eyes again, Theron was watching him with that same patient expression, waiting for an answer that would determine the fate of two species and countless worlds. Sam Rodriguez spent the next 2 days buried in Theron's data files, cross-referencing them with public records and news archives from the war years. What he found made him sick to his stomach. Every piece of evidence supported the dragon's version of events, while the official human records were full of gaps, contradictions, and convenient omissions. The most damning evidence came from deep space sensor logs that had been classified for 10 years and then quietly deleted from most databases. Sam only found them because his salvage license gave him access to old navigation records, and even then the files were buried under layers of bureaucratic nonsense that would discourage most people from looking too closely. Those sensor logs showed the Devourer's approach toward human space, its gravitational signature growing stronger each year. As it consumed world after world on the outer rim, the entity was massive beyond comprehension, stretching across light years of space like a living shadow that devoured everything in its path. Pete, Sam called his engineer into his quarters, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I need you to run a deep scan of this system. Look for gravitational anomalies, dark matter concentrations, anything that doesn't belong. Pete scratched his graying beard and looked at the data Sam had spread across his desk. What am I looking for exactly? These readings are like nothing I've ever seen before. Something big, something that shouldn't be there. Sam could not bring himself to explain about the Devourer yet. He needed proof his crew could see for themselves before he tried to convince them that humanity's greatest enemy was already in their system. While Pete ran his scans, Sam returned to the cargo bay where Theron waited with the endless patience of a creature that had lived for centuries. The dragon's golden eyes tracked Sam's movement as he approached, but Theron said nothing until Sam spoke first. "I've been checking your story against our records," Sam said without preamble. "The official histories don't match what you've shown me." "Truth has a way of being inconvenient for those in power," Theron replied. "It is easier to maintain authority when the people believe they are righteous and their enemies are evil." Sam pulled up the classified sensor logs on his datapad and showed them to Theron. "These readings show something approaching our space starting about 15 years ago. The dates match your timeline for when this devourer thing started moving toward human territory." Theron studied the data with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. "These are good recordings, very detailed. Your sensor technology has improved since the war. Yes, this is definitely the devourer's gravitational signature. See how it grows stronger over time as it consumes more matter? How many worlds has it eaten?" Sam asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Based on these readings, I would estimate at least 200 star systems on the outer rim, all the frontier colonies that stopped sending communications during the war years. Your government probably assumed they were destroyed in dragon raids or simply cut off by the fighting." Sam felt his stomach drop. 200 star systems meant billions of people. Entire civilizations wiped out while humanity was busy fighting dragons over a misunderstanding. All those missing colony ships, all those frontier worlds that went silent during the war years. They had not been destroyed by dragon attacks. They had been consumed by something far worse. "Captain," Pete's voice came over the intercom, tight with concern. "You need to see these scan results. I'm picking up massive gravitational distortions on the edge of the system. Whatever's out there, it's big enough to affect local spacetime." Sam's blood turned to ice. "How long until it reaches the inner planets?" "Hard to say without more detailed scans, but based on the gravitational gradient, maybe 3 weeks. 4 at the outside." Sam closed his eyes and tried to process what Pete had just told him. 3 weeks until the devourer reached the core worlds where most of humanity lived. 3 weeks to convince a species that had just finished celebrating victory over their greatest enemy, that their real enemy was already at their doorstep. "Your engineer is very good," Theron observed. "Most humans would not be able to detect the devourer until it was much closer. Perhaps there is hope after all." "Hope for what?" Sam asked bitterly. "Even if I could convince people this thing exists, what could we possibly do against something that eats entire star systems?" "My people fought it before," Theron said quietly. 12,000 years ago, when it first found our original galaxy. We learned its weaknesses, discovered ways to slow its advance, even developed weapons that could hurt it. All of that knowledge is stored in these restraints that bind me." Sam looked at the strange metal chains that held Theron captive. Up close, they seemed to pulse with their own internal light, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when he was not looking directly at them. "Knowledge stored in chains?" "These are not simple restraints," Theron explained. "They are memory devices designed by our greatest scholars to preserve everything we learned about fighting the devourer. Battle strategies, weapon designs, evacuation procedures, even the locations of safe worlds beyond its reach. Everything needed to give both our species a fighting chance. Then why haven't you used this knowledge before now?" Theron's laugh was bitter and full of pain. "Because the chains are keyed to my life force and my willingness to share what they contain. For 60 years I have been a prisoner, watching both our peoples destroy each other while the real enemy approached. I could have shared this knowledge at any time. But who would have listened to a chained dragon spouting warnings about cosmic threats?" Sam understood now why Theron had remained in captivity for so long. Even if he had escaped, even if he had tried to warn people about the devourer, no human would have believed him. Dragons were the enemy, the defeated foe that humanity had rightfully conquered. Their warnings would be dismissed as tricks or lies designed to weaken human defenses. "What changed?" Sam asked. "Why are you willing to share this knowledge now?" "Because you listened," Theron said simply. "Because you asked questions instead of making assumptions. Because you have seen the evidence with your own eyes and chosen to believe the truth instead of comfortable lies." Pete's voice came over the intercom again, more urgent this time. "Captain, I'm getting some weird readings from the outer system. Long-range sensors show something that's blocking starlight. It's like there's a moving shadow out there and it's huge." Sam and Theron looked at each other, both understanding what Pete had discovered. The devourer was no longer hiding at the edge of the system. It was making its presence known, beginning the slow approach that would end with the consumption of every living thing in human space. "We're out of time," Sam said. Not yet, Theron replied. The devourer moves slowly when it feeds, savoring each world it consumes. It will start with the outer planets and work its way inward, giving us perhaps a month before it reaches the core worlds, but only if we act quickly. What do you need me to do? Free me from these chains, Theron said, his golden eyes blazing with desperate hope. Release the knowledge they contain and help me broadcast a warning to both our peoples. Give them the truth about what happened at New Texas and what is coming for them now. Sam stared at the dragon, knowing that everything depended on his next decision. He could continue to Frontier Station, sell Theron to collectors, and pretend this conversation had never happened. He could live his remaining days in comfortable ignorance while the devourer consumed the galaxy around him. Or he could take the biggest gamble of his life, trust a former enemy, and try to save two species that might not want to be saved. The choice was simple in theory, but almost impossible in practice. Everything he had been taught, everything he believed about right and wrong, was pulling him in different directions. If I free you, Sam said slowly, how do I know you won't just fly away and leave us to face this thing alone? You don't, Theron admitted. You have only my word, given freely, that I will stay and fight beside you against our common enemy. The same word I gave to my own people 60 years ago when I volunteered to carry this knowledge, knowing it might cost me my freedom forever. Sam looked at the chains that bound Theron, then at the sensor readings that showed the approaching darkness. Time was running out for both their species, and the luxury of doubt was something they could no longer afford. The dragon was right about one thing. The time for comfortable lies was over. Only the truth could save them now. Sam Rodriguez gathered his crew in the Iron Star's small galley, knowing that what he was about to tell them would change everything. Pete Williams sat across from him, his weathered face creased with worry lines that had deepened over the past few days. Maria Santos leaned against the wall, arms crossed and ready for bad news. Doc Henley occupied his usual corner, his ancient hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I need to tell you something about our cargo, Sam began, then stopped. How did you explain to people that everything they believed about the war was wrong? How did you convince them that their former enemies were actually trying to save them from something worse? The dragon can talk, he said finally. Pete raised an eyebrow. Of course it can talk. All the intelligent species can communicate somehow. Question is whether it's saying anything worth hearing. It is, Sam said, and then he told them everything. The real story of New Texas, the truth about the war, the approaching threat that had been consuming worlds while humans and dragons killed each other over misunderstandings. He showed them the sensor data, the classified files, the evidence that proved their greatest victory was built on lies. His crew listened in silence, their faces growing more troubled with each revelation. When Sam finished speaking, the galley was quiet except for the steady hum of the ship's engines carrying them toward a future that suddenly seemed far less certain. You're saying the whole war was a mistake? Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not a mistake, Sam corrected. A tragedy. Both sides made choices based on incomplete information and fear. The dragons tried to warn us. We shot first and asked questions later. And by the time anyone realized what was really happening, it was too late to stop the fighting. Doc Henley set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. 2 billion people died in that war, both sides combined. You're telling me they all died for nothing? They died because the real enemy wanted them to, Sam said. This devourer thing, it feeds on conflict and division. It's easier to consume a galaxy when the people living there are too busy fighting each other to notice the threat approaching from outside. Pete pulled up the sensor readings on his datapad, studying the gravitational anomalies with the practiced eye of an engineer who had spent decades working in deep space. These readings are real, he said finally. Whatever's out there, it's bigger than anything I've ever seen. Makes a Star Destroyer look like a child's toy. So what do you want us to do? Maria asked. Turn around and try to warn people who won't believe us? Give up the biggest payday of our lives to help the same dragons who supposedly killed my brother at Kepler Station? Sam had known this moment would come, when his crew would have to choose between their beliefs and the truth, between financial security and doing what was right. He could not blame them for hesitating. Everything he was asking them to accept went against 10 years of propaganda and a lifetime of assumptions about who the good guys really were. The dragon says his chains contain knowledge about fighting this thing, Sam said. Battle strategies, weapon designs, everything his people learned about the Devourer over thousands of years. If we free him, he can share that knowledge with both our species. If, Pete emphasized. Big word there, Captain. What if this is all some elaborate trick? What if the dragon is lying about everything, just to get us to free him? Sam had asked himself the same question dozens of times over the past few days. The smart play, the safe play, was to stick with the original plan. Sell the dragon at Frontier Station, take their money and let someone else worry about cosmic threats and ancient enemies. But the evidence was too strong to ignore and the stakes were too high to gamble with. Look at the sensor data, Sam said. Look at the classified files. Look at what's happening on the edge of our system right now. Either this is the most elaborate hoax in galactic history, or we're facing something that makes the war look like a minor disagreement between neighbors. The crew studied the evidence Sam had compiled, cross-referencing it with their own observations and coming to the same terrible conclusion. Something was out there, something vast and hungry that had been approaching human space for years while everyone was distracted by other concerns. Assuming you're right about all this, Doc Henley said slowly, what makes you think anyone will listen to us? We're salvage operators, not military commanders or government officials. Who's going to believe a warning from a crew that spends their time picking through space junk? Maybe no one, Sam admitted. But we have to try. The alternative is sitting back and watching while billions of people die because they don't know what's coming for them. Maria pushed herself away from the wall and began pacing the small galley, her boots clicking against the metal deck plates. Even if we could convince people this threat is real, what then? You said this thing has been eating entire star systems. What could we possibly do against something like that? Together, maybe something, Sam said. Humans and dragons working as allies instead of enemies. Using the knowledge the dragon carries to build weapons and defenses that might actually work. It's not much of a chance, but it's the only chance we have. The galley fell silent again as each crew member wrestled with the decision before them. Sam could see the conflict in their faces, the struggle between what they wanted to believe and what the evidence clearly showed. They had followed him faithfully for years, trusted his judgment through dangerous salvage runs and risky business deals. Now he was asking them to trust him with something far more important than money or safety. There's something else, Sam said quietly. The dragon told me he's been in those chains for 60 years. He could have broken free at any time, but he stayed prisoner because he was waiting for someone who would listen to what he had to say. Waiting for what? Pete asked. Someone like us. Someone willing to question the official story and look at the evidence with clear eyes. Someone who would choose truth over comfort, even when that truth is terrible. Sam stood up and moved to the cargo bay door, his hand resting on the access panel. Beyond that door waited a creature that represented everything humanity had been taught to fear and hate. But also beyond that door was knowledge that might save both their species from extinction. I'm going to free him, Sam said. I'm going to release the knowledge in those chains and help him broadcast a warning to anyone who will listen. If you want to leave, if you want to take one of the escape pods and head for the nearest station, I won't stop you. This isn't your choice to make. Like hell it isn't, Maria said, her voice strong with determination. We're a crew. We stick together no matter what. If you're crazy enough to trust a dragon with the fate of the galaxy, then I guess we're all crazy enough to help you do it. Pete nodded his agreement, while Doc Henley just smiled and picked up his coffee cup again. Been flying with you for 15 years, Sam. Not about to stop now just because things got a little complicated. Sam felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not even realized he was carrying. His crew trusted him enough to follow him into the unknown, to risk everything on the word of a former enemy and the hope that truth might triumph over prejudice. It was more than he deserved and exactly what he needed. All right then, Sam said, opening the door to the cargo bay. Let's go change the course of history. Theron was waiting for them, his golden eyes calm and patient as Sam's crew filed into the cargo bay. The dragon showed no surprise at seeing all of them together, as if he had known they would make this choice all along. Thank you, Theron said simply, his voice carrying the weight of decades of hope and despair, for listening, for believing, for choosing the difficult path when the easy one would have been safer. Sam knelt beside the strange metal chains that bound the dragon, studying their alien construction and the symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the light. Somewhere in those bonds was knowledge that could save two species or watch them die as fools. The only question was whether Sam had the courage to release it into a galaxy that might not want to be saved. Sam Rodriguez held the plasma cutter in his hands, its weight feeling heavier than any tool he had ever wielded. Around him, his crew watched in tense silence as he positioned the cutting beam near the first of the alien chains that bound Theron. The dragon remained perfectly still, his golden eyes calm and trusting despite 60 years of captivity. "Are you sure about this?" Pete asked one final time, his voice barely above a whisper. Sam looked at his engineer, then at Maria and Doc Henley, seeing his own doubts reflected in their faces. They were about to free a creature that their entire species had been taught to fear and hate. They were gambling the safety of the galaxy on the word of their former enemy, trusting that ancient knowledge would prove stronger than recent prejudice. "No," Sam said honestly. "I'm not sure about anything anymore. But I know what the sensor readings show, and I know what happens if we do nothing." He activated the plasma cutter, its bright beam slicing through the first chain link like it was made of paper. The metal fell away with a sound like breaking glass, and immediately Sam could feel something change in the air around them. Energy flowed from the severed chains into Theron's body, carrying with it knowledge that had been locked away for decades. The dragon's eyes blazed brighter as memories flooded back into his consciousness. Battle plans and weapon designs, evacuation routes and safe havens, everything his people had learned about fighting the Devourer across millennia of desperate struggle. Sam cut through the remaining chains one by one, each severed link releasing more of the ancient knowledge until finally Theron was free. For a moment, the dragon simply lay there, flexing muscles that had been bound for 60 years. Then slowly and carefully, he stretched his magnificent wings for the first time since the war ended. The sight took Sam's breath away. This was not the savage beast of human propaganda, but a creature of grace and intelligence that commanded respect rather than fear. "Thank you," Theron said, his voice carrying new strength and purpose. "The knowledge is returning to me now. I remember everything my people learned about the Devourer, everything we discovered about its nature and its weaknesses." "What do we do now?" Maria asked, her voice tight with nervous energy. Theron moved to the ship's communication array, his clawed hands working with surprising delicacy on the human-designed controls. "Now we send a message that will either save both our species or watch them die in ignorance. Captain Rodriguez, may I use your ship's broadcast system?" Sam nodded, though part of him wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Once Theron began broadcasting, there would be no going back. The truth would be out there for everyone to hear, and the consequences would be beyond their control. Theron's voice filled the communication channels, reaching every ship and station in the system, with a message that would change the course of history. "People of Earth and her colonies, I am Theron, last scholar of the Draconic Empire. What I tell you now will sound like madness, but I ask only that you look to your sensors and see the truth with your own eyes." Sam watched the ship's communication board light up as responses flooded in from across the system. Some were dismissive, calling the broadcast a hoax or a trick. Others were angry, demanding to know how a dragon had gained access to human communication networks. But a few, just a few, were asking questions and requesting more information. "Your enemy is not the dragon," Theron continued, his voice carrying across space to reach anyone willing to listen. "Your enemy is the darkness between the stars, the force that feeds on conflict and grows stronger as civilizations destroy themselves in pointless wars. It has found us at last, and it brings with it the end of everything we hold dear." As if summoned by Theron's words, the long-range sensors began detecting massive gravitational disturbances on the edge of the system. Stars were going out one by one, consumed by something vast and hungry that moved through space like spilled ink across paper. The Devourer was no longer hiding its presence. It was announcing its arrival with the systematic destruction of everything in its path. "Sweet mother of space," Doc Henley whispered, staring at the sensor readings. "It's real. It's actually real." Emergency broadcasts began flooding the communication channels as human ships and stations detected the approaching threat. Fear and confusion spread through the system as people tried to understand what they were seeing. Some blamed the dragons for the disturbances, convinced this was some new form of attack. Others recognized the readings for what they truly were and began preparing for evacuation. "This is Admiral Stone of the Third Fleet," came a voice over the emergency channels. "All civilian vessels are ordered to proceed immediately to designated safe zones. Military units will engage the unidentified threat and attempt to determine its intentions." "They're going to try to fight it," Pete said, disbelief clear in his voice. Theron's expression was grim as he watched the human fleet movements on the tactical display. Brave but foolish. Conventional weapons cannot harm the devourer. I have seen entire armadas consumed in minutes when they tried to stand against it with force alone. Then what can we do? Sam asked. We run, Theron said simply. We evacuate as many people as possible to the safe worlds beyond the devourer's reach, and we prepare for a longer war than anyone can imagine. But first we must convince both our peoples to work together instead of falling back into old patterns of mistrust and hatred. The communication channels erupted with conflicting voices as human and dragon representatives tried to establish contact for the first time since the war ended. Decades of propaganda and prejudice made cooperation difficult, but the approaching threat was impossible to ignore. Even the most hardened veterans of the war could see that the devourer was unlike anything they had ever faced. Dragon ship requesting permission to dock came a transmission from a small craft approaching the Iron Star. We bring representatives from the surviving dragon colonies, along with data about evacuation routes and defensive strategies. Sam looked at Theron, who nodded approvingly. They heard my message. Some of my people survived the war and have been hiding in the outer systems. Now they come forward to offer their aid, despite everything that has happened between our species. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as representatives from both species worked frantically to coordinate an evacuation effort. The devourer was moving faster than expected, consuming outer system installations with terrifying efficiency. Time was running out for both humans and dragons, but for the first time in decades they were working together instead of against each other. Evacuation, fleet forming up at coordinates 77 Alpha, came Admiral Stone's voice over the command channel. All civilian vessels are to join the convoy immediately. We have perhaps 6 hours before the threat reaches the inner planets. Sam watched the tactical display as hundreds of ships from both species formed up into evacuation convoys, their ancient enmity set aside in the face of extinction. It was not enough to save everyone, but it was a start. The knowledge Theron carried would help them find worlds beyond the devourer's reach, places where both species could survive and eventually rebuild. Will it follow us? Maria asked as they prepared to join the evacuation fleet. Eventually, Theron admitted. The devourer is patient but relentless. It will consume this galaxy as it consumed my people's original home, then move on to the next. But we have learned to run, to hide, to survive in the spaces between galaxies. And perhaps given time we will learn to fight back. As the Iron Star took its place in the evacuation convoy, Sam looked back at the system that had been his home for most of his adult life. Soon it would be nothing but empty space, another victim of the cosmic horror that had been stalking civilization since the universe was young. But something good had come from the tragedy. Two species that had spent a decade trying to destroy each other were now working together to survive. The shackled dragon had been dragged to the Cowboy ship as a prize to be sold. But Theron's words had changed everything. Now they fled together toward an uncertain future, united by the knowledge that survival meant cooperation, and that truth was worth more than any treasure the galaxy could offer. Behind them, the stars continued to go out one by one as the devourer fed, but ahead of them lay worlds beyond its reach, places where humans and dragons could build something new together. It would not be easy, and it would not be quick, but it would be honest. And in a galaxy built on lies and misunderstanding, honesty was the rarest treasure of all. The real war was just beginning, but for the first time in decades, both species would fight it on the same side. The dragon's words had indeed changed everything, and perhaps that would be enough to save them all.